12:06. So over to you, Vignesh. We can start our session.
Sure, Sagar. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, I can hear you properly.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good.
Yep.
Thank you everyone who has joined us today for this 120-minute session here. What we are going to be covering is a couple of different solutions, all within the umbrella of Autorabit for Salesforce. So we'll start off with the automated release management platform called Autorabit itself. And we'll cover that for the first maybe 30 to 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. I'll go ahead and answer the questions that might be in the chat, or maybe for 5 minutes or so, and then we will jump into the backup and recovery platform for Salesforce. How Autorabit, as an organization, supports backup and recovery of not just Salesforce data, but and then thirdly, we'll also jump into the code scan integration that we have. As you were aware of from yesterday's session, we have recently acquired code scan as well. So it is going forward going to be a very, very tight integration with Autorabit, and we'll see how that solution works at the end of today's discussion. So let me start right away. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Thank you. So, team, I hope you're able to see my screen right here with the slide.
Yes, Vignesh, you can see your screen.
Thank you, Sagar. So I'll start off with this slide. Participants who have joined yesterday's sessions, they'll be able to closely relate to this one as well. Pesha was talking about this yesterday. So I'll start off this just to kind of, make sure that whatever we go through in the release management platform here kind of relates to a release pipeline in an organization, right? So we'll assume that this is a sample release process that an organization ABC has, right? So we will start off with some dev environments, as you can see in the left, dev 1, dev 2, and then there's some branches in here. So you can consider these as branches to where we commit the metadata members along with code changes. And upon commit to a feature branch, or maybe to a branch that's acting as a release branching model, if I may, you can then merge the changes into a consolidated environment. So typically there might be multiple, there will be multiple development work streams in an organization. So all those development work streams can be merged into a single consolidated branch, mostly called INT or SIT, or a develop branch if you go with the Git flow model. And upon a merge, we will see how using a tool like Autorabit, you can successfully deploy components to the higher environments, not just manually, but also using a CI/CD process within the tool as well. So we will look at the release management aspect to it. I know there is a mention of Vault right here towards the right end, as you can see, but we will talk about that, or probably table that for a little later in this session. So I will go back here. We will go back and forth with this slide here, team. So this is the Autorabit UI that you're able to see right here. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to wear the hat of a Salesforce admin and a developer, right? Making some code level changes in the Salesforce environment and some configuration changes in the same environment as well. So what I have with me is, let's say a project manager has assigned a specific task to me in the form of a user story. And that user story, let's say, is called Autorabit demo. So this is the one that I have in my Jira board, as you can see. Jira is not just a single solution that Autorabit supports in terms of ALM. I'm just using that here for convenience. We also support Azure DevOps, version 1, IBM RTC, and Rally as well. So going back to what I said, this is the story that I'm going to consider right now. And let's say I've already worked in this particular Salesforce environment right here. I've created some changes in here, and then I'm good to promote them to the higher environments, meaning I'm good to promote them that I have. So I will leverage the release management platform here to be able to do that, right? So first thing that I can do after logging into the platform is I can go ahead and create a new easy commit. It that we have already created as part of this user story or and it's going to commit it to a specific branch. To use or rather choose the source from this view here. I will that's where and I'm repository in the form of Bitbucket, but as you can see, we support all flavors of Git and we also support SVN and TFS as well. In this case, I will use Bitbucket and I'm committing to a branch that's specific to the story that I'm developing. So I call it dev1. The naming convention might not be actually realistic here, but if you want to be able to create a feature branch on the fly, you can go ahead and create a new branch then and there, assign it a specific master parent branch, and then create it and commit components to that particular branch. So that's one of the features that we have to create a branch instantaneously, if I may. And throughout the commit process, right, I don't just want to create metadata in the Salesforce dev box and have it committed to a version control system. I want to go through an approval process. Validation of changes comes into play, where I go ahead and check whether my metadata package is successfully validated against a higher environment or not. We'll talk more about that in just a minute or so, but think of this option right here as a code review process, if I may. And as mentioned, we are relating this metadata package commit to a specific work item in Jira, right? So upon the successful commit, I want to be able to change my Jira work item's status to do, which is its current status, to maybe something like an in progress. So how do I make sure that the state? That's where Autorabit can help you as well. So you can update the ALM work item status from here. So let's say I want to tag the metadata package with a Jira right now, and I select auto demos as my project. And this is the sprint that I'm working on right now, David's sprint. And I can select the work item. So that would be right here, TEMS 10 Autorabit demo. And as you can see, the current status reads to do. So after a commit is successful, let's say I want to change this to in progress. So I can select in progress from this view and go ahead and start fetching metadata members. And what this will do is it will take us to a selection pane, if I may, where you can go ahead and view all the metadata members that you have changed. What does that mean? There might be multiple Salesforce elements or Salesforce metadata members in your development environment, right? You don't want to be put in a situation as a developer or an admin, you don't want to be put in a situation where every metadata member is displayed for you and you have to get in there and choose what you think you might have changed, right? That's going to be a tedious activity. So what Autorabit does for you is it's going to literally compare the Salesforce developer box against the branch to which you're about to commit the changes, and only the differences in terms of metadata members are retrieved for you. So if let's say I have 10 Apex classes, out of which only one is retrieved right here, right? What it means is, it means that the other 9 Apex classes are already in its latest version in the target branch to which we are about to commit the changes. So this is the only class that has recently gone through some changes and it's available for us to cherry pick from. So here I've selected a decent bunch of components. To be exact, I've selected 39 components here. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go to the next window, and prior to a commit, as a developer, as an admin, in fact, this is more interesting from a developer perspective, maybe, because they want to understand what code level changes they have introduced in that particular environment. So you can compare the metadata differences, both code and config level changes, in a single view prior to committing the changes to the target. So if you look at a bot item.cls file, right, I've just modified some comments here and there and added some comments in other sections of the code. nothing great when it comes to changes, but this is how the differences will be displayed. In Git, you would ideally get these differences after a check-in, but Autorabit kind of lets you view those differences prior to a check-in. And also, if you go to some of the other files in here, let's say marketing profile, right? I'm only, or rather, Autorabit is only cherry picking the changes and moving it to the target. What I mean by that is, I've included this particular Salesforce field as part of the package that I'm about to commit, right? So only the field level permission is being included in the profile. Likewise, only the layout assignment is included right here, and only the tab visibility is included right here. So any object level change that I might have made that introduces all these permission or access setting changes, only specific sections of that particular profile or permission set will be tweaked based on the selection. And let's say as an admin or a developer, I'm good with whatever I've seen right now. I'm good to commit the components to the target repository. What I can do is I can go ahead and give a reviewer ID. So I can just give my name. I'm actually not registered in here. If you're a registered user, your username would pop up right here as in when you start typing it. But in this case, I'll just go ahead and give my work email as the reviewer. And prior to submitting a package to a review, what you can do is you can run through static code analysis in here. And that's where we have integrations with CodeScan, PMD, checkmarks, SonarQube as well. So you can leverage any of these tools to be able to run through a static code analysis in here. So I've already kind of set up some processes that uses CodeScan before. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose PMD right now to show you some of the rule sets that PMD supports and also some of its limitations as well. So I'll select this to PMD, and for participants who's not aware of static code analysis, this is basically a solution that lets you identify if there's any violations with respect to development best practices. So let's say if your Apex class is is missing out on some doc comments, Apex doc comments, right? We will go ahead and, or rather this tool is going to point out saying that, hey, your code is not fully built out yet. There is still some vulnerabilities, still some, security hotspots, if I may. So the developer, will be notified of those and they can correct it prior to a commit. So that's what, these SAST solutions will do. And also you can validate a deployment prior to a commit. So how does this help, right? So if I go back to this slide right here, there we go, in full screen mode. Here we are about to check in metadata from dev1 box into the developer branch, assuming this is the dev branch, right? And prior to a check-in, usually when we perform a commit, it's always a hard commit, right? You don't want to roll back the commit at any point in time, unless and until you encounter some worst case scenarios, right? So what you do prior to a check-in is you validate the package against a higher environment like an INT or a prod to make sure that that user story that you've just worked on is successfully getting deployed to the target or not. So if my validation against INT, let's say integration, is successful, only then I push the metadata members into the feature branch. So that way I know that my package is going to be successfully deployed at a later point in time. So that's where this validation comes into play. Kind of very effective when you talk about, identifying flaws or defects or failures at a very early stage. So you kind of adopt the shift left methodology in DevOps, or rather DevSecOps, if I may. And you can run Apex test levels with this particular validation of deployment as well. We'll talk more about that in the deployment phase. And there are some options with respect to validating this particular deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and check ignore missing visible settings. This is something that I want to stress more on when it comes to the deployment piece. So bear with me for just a few more minutes here. So here, after all the configurations are complete, let me go ahead and initiate the commit. So if I check the details, this will go ahead and run through the static code analysis. In fact, the static code analysis results are looking good, as in the report has been generated. There are still some violations, maybe not a P1 violation is what we are trying to see. So if you look at an Apex class here, a bot item, right? So I can go all the way down and I can check all these violations. So when I click on a specific violation, Autorabit is going to point out to the line where a developer has violated a best practice because he or she did not add an Apex stock comment to that particular section of the code. So with respect to Apex PMD, these are the rules that it can handle. There are pre-built rule sets that's available in GitHub because PMD is open source, right? So you can check those rule sets in GitHub. They have security best practices, documentation best practices, and so on and so forth. But it's very, very limited. Put together, you might have maybe 60 to 80 different rules that this particular solution has. And that's where it doesn't necessarily always validate your code or metadata with all the best practices that exists. And that's also one of the reasons why we recommend a tool like CodeScan. We'll shortly have a look at that in the deployment sections. And when it comes to deployment validation, I have validated 34 metadata components against the target environment, INT. And this is just a validation, not a deployment, right? And there's no failed components. And if I've run through any Apex test scenarios, let's say, you'll be able to see all the code coverage warnings if the code coverage is less than 75% or so. And if there's any test failures, you'll be able to see that as well. Something like an invalid signature or any syntax errors with respect to Apex classes. And any destructive metadata that you're dealing with right now will also be shown in here. So for example, let's say I want to delete some metadata members from the target branch just because it's not going to be utilized for this particular sprint and also the future sprints going forward. Then I can delete metadata as part of the commit as well. So including the constructive changes, some additions that I'm making on top of existing metadata, I can also delete some metadata members if there is such a requirement. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore these P3 warnings because all of these are like, comment level changes that's being suggested. So I will ignore that. And as a reviewer, what the actual reviewer can do is they can log into the solution and review these reports. And if everything looks good, that reviewer, go ahead and say, this particular, not God, sorry, it looks good, and they can go ahead and approve this. And after the approval is complete, we can either auto commit the changes into the repository. You can set up such a workflow as well. And if it has to be manual in the organization, then the concerned developer or the admin, they'll log into the platform again, and then they'll go ahead and remote push these components to the target repository. So basically, with respect to commit, as you might know, it involves generating the delta and then promoting the delta into the target, because commit with respect to Git or SVN or any other version control system is going to accept only changes made compared to its previous version, right? So we generate that delta, complete the commit with the revision ID displayed for you. And what this will finally bring is, it's going to change the status of the Jira user story. So as we have linked the Jira user story to this particular comment, right? So if I go to my Jira board here, I can refresh. And this is going to change the work item to in progress. And not just that, it is going to actually show all the metadata members that's part of that particular commit as well. Sorry about the slight delay here. Internet usually patchy these days. Okay, I'm just going to give this If not, I come back to this later. There we go. There we go. So Autorabit demo is right here. So you can see the transition from to do to in progress, right? Once I view the user story, I'll be able to see all data related. Okay. So just wanted to make sure that the screen flow versus what I was talking throughout connected or resonated well with the participants team. Because I see that Jira is kind of loading slowly. So I hope Autorabit window is okay. Yeah, so this was what I was referring to earlier. Autorabit evaluation, this is the user ID with respect to Autorabit. That person committed the changes 2 minutes back, and these are the metadata changes committed to the Bitbucket environment. So you can see the commit ID, you can see the as to how the validation fared, and who approved the changes, and what was the result of static code analysis as well. So going back to this particular view right here, the commit is now complete, and I'm going to switch back to the slides here. So we are right now in this particular section of the release pipeline, right? We are in the pre-validate section. So taking it one step forward, this is where I'm going to be merging my changes with another development or another admin work stream. So another dev work stream is already in progress right here. So they will start committing their changes to a consolidated develop branch, let's say, and I'm going to do the same. And we're going to experience some merge level conflicts here. So we'll see how that can be resolved within the UI. And to be able to perform a merge, it's going to be super quick within Autorabit. The reason I say that is all you have to do is go to the successful commit in here, click on these three dots, go ahead and click quick merge. It shows kind of a picture of all the different files that are to be merged. And once you go ahead and click on proceed, all you have to do is enter the get message and select the target branch. So it's committed in the dev1 branch right now, our 39 components. And we're going to go ahead and merge them into INT as per the release process, right? Considering that is our quote unquote develop branch. So I'm going to give this a name, and I'll just go ahead and go with the work item name because that's best practice, right? And I'll associate that with the timestamp as well, not 23, 25. And these are some pre-validation options that we have as part of merge. So you have the ability to generate a diff report, as we have seen earlier, how differences would look like prior to a commit. And you can run static code analysis as well, like how we have run with commits earlier. And you can validate your deployment too. Again, all these options are something that we have already identified before or seen with commits. So I'm going to uncheck them right now. And you also have the option to tag your ALM work items. So when it comes to ALM work items, you can tag the stories or bugs or epics, tasks, you name it, with a commit, merge, or a deployment within Autorabit. That way, whatever activity you do in this tool, you're able to relate that to a user story in your ALM system, so that tracking becomes all the more easier between three systems, between Autorabit versus Bitbucket or any version control versus your ALM system. So in this case, I'll go ahead and initiate a merge. So this is currently in progress here, and I can check the details to see whether it takes us to a conflicting scenario or not. In this case, it doesn't, so that's good. So it means that it's going to push the remote, and once it does, it's going to populate a revision number as well right here up at the top. So this one's completed with this revision, so it's all good. This is probably the easiest way forward, right? Let's look at a complicated scenario, meaning what happens if there is a conflict? So if you look at the third row here, called get merge, I'll go ahead and resolve the conflict for this one. And there's only 3 files that I've tried to merge from the source branch into the INT as part of um, this particular merge, right? So you can see these 3 files conflicting here. So let's start with probably a class. So if you look at a class here, first conflict that I see is a line level conflict on a comment within the Apex class. But a specific file need not have just one conflict or two. It can have multiple conflicts, and they can be separated out into conflicting blocks as well. So after the second line, do I have any other conflicts in my Apex class? If I want to figure that out, I can go to the next conflict. I can look at the last line here. So the first couple of lines has a conflict as shown right here. And if I go to the next one, the last line also has a conflict as well. Again, these are very, very simplistic changes here, but the idea is to actually show how Autorabit views or identifies these conflicts and how a user can resolve it. So if you look at some of the options, when you use Git, right, to resolve a conflict, there's multiple ways to resolve it. You might encounter a fast forward merge. You might look at a fast forward merge as the proper way to resolve a conflict for a specific scenario. And sometimes you might also, look at a recursive merge as a good strategy to resolve conflict. And sometimes you might go with theirs, ours. These are 2 different strategies to choose how to resolve a conflict, right? So all these strategies are supported within this tool as well. So instead of working out of a solution like a source tree or even a VS Code, I would say, this gives you much better options in terms of resolving those conflicts. So let's look into the details of those scenarios. So before we look into the conflicting scenarios or resolution scenarios, here is the def2 branch, right? So in this case, we consider def2 as the source file from a merge conflict that I've already initiated earlier. And this is the target right here called int destination file, and the conflict is display. And the merged section right here kind of gives you a preview of how the merged code would look like. So, once I go ahead and resolve these conflicts, let's say with a source file, then this is going to populate with all the source lines in here for this one and also the previous conflict as well. And once it populates everything with the source file, this is how the merged code would look like. So if I'm happy with what I'm seeing right now, I can just resolve the conflict, merge it to the target. As simple as that. But let me go ahead and undo these changes here. Okay, so here we have 5 different options, but there's technically 3 different strategies to resolve the conflict. One is if, let's say, you start from the first conflict, right? Let's say line number 2 is conflicting with the same line number in the target. So one way to resolve this conflict is you decide whether you want to retain the source changes, the April 12th comment, or you decide to retain the change that's in the integration branch. That's 2 options for you. And the third option might be you decide to choose that both these lines should be part of my target branch. Meaning I should go ahead and merge the second line with whatever change is already present in my integration, not overwriting anything. So these 3 are the different resolution techniques, if I may. So Autorabit supports all 3, like I said earlier, wherein you can use source file, meaning you choose this particular line over this one. So technically, whatever is present in the INT branch is going to be overwritten using the source branch. That's what a source file would mean. Destination file is literally the other way around, meaning you don't want your target branch to be overwritten with any source code from the source branch, in this case, dev2. So I retain whatever is there in the dev branch as it is. And for me to do that, I can go ahead and select destination file. But how do I kind of make sure that both these comments appear in the target branch? That's where last couple of options come into play. If I choose this one, right, you can see both the comments are populated in here. So if I'm good with these changes, I can go ahead and resolve the conflicts, make sure that I go to the next block and do the same. And once I have multiple lines populated in the target branch, I can just look at the preview of my merged code in here. And if everything looks good, resolve the conflict, go about the other class and the other object. So this is with respect to a class that we have seen. Class is kind of a code level change, right? But what about the configuration change? Configuration changes typically are either handled by a release manager during the merge, or they are auto-resolved using Autorabit. So what does it mean by auto-resolve, right? So when you initiate a merge, you can choose how Autorabit should address the conflicts if they come up during that merge process. So let's say I'm merging like we did earlier, right? We try to merge from dev1 to int branch. Let me go to this one. Dev1 right here to int branch, and this merge was successful. But had it resulted in a conflict, how can I as a user go ahead and tell Autorabit to auto resolve them? So I can either tell Autorabit to choose the files from this one, meaning if there are any conflicts with respect to class or a code config level change, then I can tell Autorabit to choose the configuration or code level element that is in the source branch as my source of truth. So if my dev1 branch has a process builder that's set to active, right? And the int branch, which is the target, has the same process builder, but that is inactive. So if I want to activate the process builder, what should I do? I should go to my source branch, tell Autorabit to identify that as a source file, and then resolve the conflict. That way, it will be activated in the destination as well. So auto resolution is also supported within this solution. So in this case, let's say I want to include the compliance group that I've added to that particular field as part of the object to the destination branch as well. So let's say I want to do the same for all the files. So I select everything at once. I can use the source. So whatever is in the source branch gets moved over to the target. And that way conflicts are resolved. And once the conflicts are resolved, I can go ahead and commit the changes. There we go. The merged changes are committed with so-and-so revision, and you will be able to see the status change shortly as well. So once the status change is completed, right? So as soon as the merge is complete into the int branch, we have received a specific revision number. So what you can do is you can have a CI process or an automated process set up in such a way that it starts as soon as the merge is completed into the target branch. So if we go back to VC just for a moment here, I'll go to this particular label here. Okay, let me resolve this real quick. Okay, we haven't resolved it for the other file actually, my bad. That's why it did not actually complete the merge for us. So now all the three files are resolved and everything looks good. There we go. Now the merge is in progress, and I've set up an automated workflow process in such a way that as soon as this merge is completed, right, it auto initiates the deployment from the integration branch to the integration sandbox. So if I go to CI jobs in here, I'll be able to see the deployment that's already in progress. That is my workflow that I have set up. So going back to this slide here, just for a moment, this is where we were in the INT branch, right? A developed branch or a consolidated branch. I auto-initiated the deployment to INT sandbox, and that's the deployment that's currently in progress. And in case the deployment succeeds, right? What the workflow would look like is as soon as the deployment is successful, it's going to initiate a production validation. So as you can see from the INT branch, which will be the source, it's going to initiate a production validation with some test coverage or test run as well. So if the unit tests cross the 75% threshold, it will then initiate the prod deployment. So I've literally chained these three jobs together in such a way that one is run after the other. So there we go. INT deployment is right now complete, and the prod validation has started. If the prod validation is successful with proper code coverage, then our prod deployment will be initiated right after. So this is basically an example of how to chain multiple jobs in here. And I'm going to probably spend another 5 minutes kind of showing you the configuration of such a job, and also talk briefly about data loader as well. So let me take a new example here. We call automated deployment processes as CI jobs in here, and you can deploy from various sources in here. You can deploy from a Salesforce environment or version control system, be it in SFDX format or regular format as well. So if it's in a regular format, you can probably use this option which says deploy from version control. And all we have to configure is choose what the source is, choose what the target is, and then you're good to go. So obviously the job name has to be mentioned in here, and the source in our case will be a Bitbucket environment that I had already set up. I can choose the integration branch, and I can choose a bunch of revisions that I want to deploy to the target then and there. So that's where the baseline revision comes into play. In case you don't want to choose a baseline revision, you don't want to go by the revision IDs when it comes to source of a deployment, but instead you want to choose a time range. Let's say you started your sprint on the 13th of April, let's say. So if that's the case, then you can choose 13th of April right here and select a specific timestamp, meaning commits that are made to INT on or after this particular time will be packaged together, and then you can deploy them all to the target environment. So be it INT or prod, and you can set Apex test levels as well. And one of the two of the most interesting things with respect to CI configuration that I like the most is Apex test level. When it comes to code coverage run, there's something specific to Autorabit on top of what Salesforce offers. So Salesforce has something called code coverage tables, right? It runs classes for you. It runs, through all the checks, and then gives you a final percentage as to what the org code coverage is. So it stores all those results in a code coverage table, and based and leveraging that code coverage table, we identify the dependencies between a specific class and its test class. So let's say I'm currently deploying a package of 40 components, right? In those 40 components, I have 5 Apex classes and 5 triggers. Just an example. So if these 10 components are related to, let's say, 30 test methods and not more in the target, then this option will automatically fetch those 30 dependent Apex classes and run the code coverage only on those for you. So if your prod is in such a way that it's code heavy, has around 800 Apex classes, you don't always have to run all tests in the org every time you perform a deployment, not even against production. And there is rollback options available as well. You can validate a deployment, and you can initiate post deployment jobs as well. So remember from earlier where we actually talked about how one CI job upon completion triggers another one, and then upon successful validation triggers a third one. So this is where we chain CI jobs, right? So what I've done is, in the setup, I have created a CI process. On successful run of that CI process, I can go ahead and tag it to another one. So it invokes the subsequent process as well. And one other thing that I like the most on top of code coverage is the ignore missing visibility settings. The name might sound a little mouthful here. We are planning to kind of have a brief name to that in the near future. But the idea of this one is it deploys only the delta differences in the package. How is that new? How is that different, right? It is different because if you look at a profile or a permission set, workflow, object, anything that falls under the nested metadata umbrella, you're going to consume a lot of processing time to be able to deploy that to the target environment. So how do we make sure that the deployment time is minimal? Let's take an example of a profile. A profile typically has around 80,000 lines of XML, or if you're part of a huge organization, it can even go up to 500,000 lines and much more, right? So let's start with 18. A profile has 80,000 lines of XML, and when you try to change a couple of permissions in that profile, it's not that you're retrieving only those changed permissions from the source. You're literally retrieving the entire profile, moving it to the target at almost all times. So instead, what Autorabit does is, if we know that you have changed just an FLS setting, or maybe 10 FLS settings, let's say, then instead of processing all 80,000 lines of XML, we process only the 40 lines of changed FLS settings, deploy those 40 lines to the target. So you can multiply that with the number of profiles or permission sets that you have in your environment, and see how that can save lots of time. So that's what this option does. And it's recommended to have that setting enabled whenever you deal with such nested metadata types, not just profiles or permission sets, but something like objects and workflows as well. And there's also support for functional tests. There was a question around it earlier yesterday as well, as to what as to how automated functional tests can be executed. Autorabit currently supports Selenium, Provar, and AccelQ when it comes to functional testing. So any of these solutions that your organization uses, you can definitely integrate that with Autorabit and be able to execute functional tests upon successful deployment as well. So that's definitely an option. And apart from whatever we have seen so far, you can, this is all on the metadata side of things, right? We also have a data migration solution as well. Probably just a quick sneak peek into that one here. The data load process is where you take source records from any of the source environment, typically a prod, and then you mask the data, you move it into the integration environment. So or development environment as well, if you have some new stories to be built out of it. So what can be done here is, I can go ahead and select prod, and then let's say dev1 is the destination. Once I log in and fetch the objects, I will get all the all the custom and standard objects that's common to these two environments, and I can quick find something out of this. So let's say I'll go ahead and select asset, right? And I will get a graphical representation of what assets dependencies are. So this is what we retrieve from the Salesforce schema builder. And you as a user will get the flexibility to choose specific records from the dependency view right here. By default, if you don't do anything, if you don't set up any sort of filters, then we're going to literally retrieve all of assets records and its dependencies. But you have the flexibility to apply a filter using this option right here. So if you have a SQL query handy as well, you can import that, or rather you can copy paste that into the solution, and we will go ahead and use that query for filtering purposes. And you can apply field mappings as well. And what this will do is, in terms of any sort of upserts that you might do, this will come in handy, because we leverage the external IDs that are configured in your Salesforce environments, and then perform upserts based off of that, just to avoid any duplicates. And when it comes to masking, you have the opportunity to kind of build masking rules for specific field types. So let's say I go to asset here. I can select the data type for a field that I want to apply filters on. Let's say date, or actually date is not something that's typical. Let's go with text here. So these are some of the masking styles that we have. So you can apply a prefix or a suffix to the beginning or end of a string. You can replace the complete string as well, something that we'd use for an email address. Let's say if my ID reads vignesh@autorabit.com, then you can replace that with a test@autorabit in your lower environments, so that upon testing, the production user do not receive any sort of emails. Or you can shuffle the characters as well. That's a good option if you're dealing with sensitive data like SSN, tax ID, so on and so forth. Or you can generate a random string as well, and you can provide the length of that particular string right here. So this is in short about the data loader offering that we have. On top of metadata migration or metadata automation, rather, we also provide support for data deployments, and this process can also be automated, as you can see down here. And you can tag a specific data migration process with a metadata deployment process. So if you're moving metadata into a QA environment and it's time for functional testing, then after the deployment of metadata is successful, you can initiate a data deployment from prod back into QA just to have some dummy data for that functional testing. So that way you can chain a data migration job with metadata deployment as well. So apart from what we have seen here, just a quick overview on the features on the left pane here. We do have manual deployment techniques. So if at any point in time you have 10 user stories in your, let's say, version control system, or rather in your QA environment, and out of 10 user stories, you have only successfully run through functional testing for 8 of them, not the other 2. And let's say this is a priority release for the organization. Then you want to selectively pick up those 8 user stories and deploy only them to the target, right? So that's where selective deployment or manual deployment comes into play. You can choose user stories or work items and deploy them selectively to the target. And we do have full support for DX as well. As and when Salesforce comes up with new upgrades or updates to the existing SFDX CLI, we implement the same updates in the form of a GUI. So whatever you're able to do via SFDX CLI, you would be able to do the same operations with much more automation and a better user interface as well. So that way, not just developers feel comfortable using this particular the SFDX GUI. It's also much more friendly for admins and other citizen developers as well, if I may. And at last, we also have the environment provisioning feature where you can automate pre and post deployment steps. So sometimes there might be a need to change community settings in different orgs. There might be a need to change custom settings or enable and disable workflows, validations, process builder rules, all of these trivial activities, right? They are trivial, but still quite important when it comes to perfecting your release. So you can automate such such activities by creating templates of your own and executing them as part of metadata deployments. So I'll kind of take a brief pause here, folks, and let's see if there's any question.
Vignesh, let me read it out for you.
Sure. I guess I was on mute. I was reading out the question.
Okay. Yeah, you go ahead then.
Sure. There's a question from Sai. Can we set minimum Apex code coverage to 85% by default? Yes, we have a global setting option where you can set the minimum code coverage depending on the organization's requirements. And one more question from Marshall. Masking happens to all the text fields in the record. Can we do it to a particular field? Great question. It doesn't happen to all the fields. When you select the data type, there will be a bunch of fields that support that data type, and it will be displayed in the masking section. You get to choose specific fields from that list. Okay, I'm going back to the general section here. Let's see. Okay, there's a question from Shubham. In pending approval phase, can we set any criteria? Example, A single commit which belongs from any specific project should get built properly in pipeline, and all unit test cases are properly executed, and CI/CD pipeline should be green. Then only then the approval. Yes, absolutely. So we have the global setting, right? As I previously talked about. It doesn't just cover the code coverage percentage, but it also gives you some approval criteria that Autorabit admins can specifically set. So this is actually one of the settings in our solution. Does Autorabit support record-based testing scripts? We do. Selenium actually supports record-based testing scripts, and we do support Selenium. So anything that would be in the format of be it Maven or non-Maven builds, if it comes with the extension .java or .side, typically that's how non-Maven scripts are, then we'll be able to support it. Sorry about that, Vibha. So hopefully at the end it was quite all right, the screen. Can we deploy profiles and roles? Yes, we can deploy profiles and roles, and we can be specific about it as well. At the very end, we did talk about Delta deployments, which mainly addresses metadata types like profiles and permission sets, where you can just deploy deltas off of it. And yes, roles can be deployed, roles can be committed, merged, and pushed into the higher environments with Autorabit as well. Yep, backup and restore is coming up. Bear with me for just a minute or two. You will be able to see that platform too. As part of post-deployment, a question from Sai again. As part of post-deployment steps, automation, can we run scripts? Yes, you can run Apex anonymous scripts, and you can also run functional testing scripts if that's the question. Can we restore the data at the same time when we deploy the data? Yes, we can do that. And that's part of the Vault solution. So we will have a look at that shortly. Sonali, can you show the SFDX overview? Yeah, happy to. I'll briefly cover that here. Yeah, so with respect to SFDX, right now I might not have anything enabled in this environment, but I'll briefly talk about it. So with SFDX, there's 4 different tabs in here. What they do is, the first tab is quite simple. You go ahead and register your dev hubs in this tab. And once the dev hubs are registered, you start to work on modularization. And what does that mean? It means that you split up your Salesforce packages into separate modules that can be individually developed. So you can think of it like um, uh, microservices, if I may, where you're not working on the entire application at once, but working on bits and pieces so that you can you can integrate all those changes at a later point in time. So that's where modularization comes into play, helps you build those monolithic packages from the production environment. And once you build a package, let's say I'm working on 12 applications at the same time as part of the Salesforce development, right? And 12 applications, maybe my Sales Cloud has 3, my Service Cloud has 5 applications, so on and so forth. So I'll go ahead and create 8 templates, one for each application, so that they can be individually developed, or 8 modules rather. And each of those modules will go ahead and sit in a scratch org of its own. So when you create a scratch org within Autorabit, you kind of give it context in the sense that you give it data as well as metadata. That way, you're able to immediately, as soon as you create a scratch org, you're able to immediately bring in your development team, start working on the new user stories, new features or tasks, and then start promoting them higher up the environment. So the contextual scratch orgs are always available for the teams right here. And of course, we also deal with unlock packages or the second gen packaging, where you can create multiple versions of unlock packages and be able to publish it to the Salesforce environment as well. So that's a quick overview on DX here. Can we restart the build pipeline? Yes, we can, Sai. If something fails, right? And let's say the failure is because of metadata types like um, something that you can ignore. I don't. I'm kind of blanking out with respect to that type. So let's say there's a standard value set, right, that you don't really need in the target environment. So only because of that, your build pipeline is failing. You can ignore that particular metadata member alone that's failing just because you don't need it in the target and restart the build pipeline. So that would be a yes. So team, without further delay, I will go ahead and start with the backup and recovery platform here, but feel free to keep posting questions about release management as well. Like we talked about earlier, we will come back to that, and I will go ahead and answer those questions for you. And if there's anything that I cannot answer, Piyush, I request your help to probably note them down so that we can answer them in a follow-up email or something.
Sure. Thank you.
Let me go ahead and share here again for the platform. I know some of the folks are here for this one. So along with the release management, back in 2018 or so, we kind of realized that just the release management platform does not really complete the DevOps cycle or the DevSecOps cycle. Even though you have support for functional testing scripts, static code analysis, approval processes, continuous deployment jobs, whatnot, we found out that without letting users take a backup of their own information, not just in the form of metadata backups, but data backups, the DevOps cycle was never complete. And that's when we started building out this product way back in 2018. Seems like a long time back right now. But the idea of this particular solution called Vault is the fact that you can take backup of metadata and data from a specific Salesforce environment and be able to restore from those backup snapshots. There's multiple functionalities as well, not just limited to backup and restore. There's ways for you to compare metadata snapshots at different points in time, and you can also archive data from a specific Salesforce environment and make sure that you're compliant with security policies like forget me clause within GDPR as well. I'll talk about them briefly in the next 20 minutes or so. So we'll get right into this one. So this is the org list that you can see right here, multiple orgs that are registered in here. And I've registered a couple of them, ARPG8, ARPG8 a destination as well. So I'll go to one of these environments here. With respect to taking a backup, right? So typically, how does that work? You go ahead and specific template and tell Vault as to what metadata types you want and what data records or data objects you want to back up from a specific environment, and what does the needful. So it goes into that particular environment, takes a snapshot in time, and then backs up those environments and then places it in a storage. And what does the storage look like? So if we go to the settings part here, right? So with respect to Vault, we support different storage types, or rather 5. 3 of them are cloud supported storage, and 2 of them are on-prem supported storage services. So we support AWS S3, which is set here by default, and there's also support for key management service within AWS. What that means is you can create your own encryption key within AWS, and you can technically leverage the concept of BYOK, bring your own keys, and then use them for encryption purposes within Vault. So this can be your S3 bucket where you're backing up metadata and data into. So that's one of the cloud options that we support. The second option is we do support Azure Blob Storage. It can be a blob storage that we maintain for you, or it can be your organization's blob storage as well. And the third one is Google Cloud. So Google Cloud has their own buckets where some of the parameters like project ID, this, that comes into play. So once you have that figured out, if Google Cloud is the storage service of the organization, then you can go ahead and leverage that as well. And the other 2 options are SAN servers, that's on-prem, and then NFS servers. So once you have the respective paths for these storage services, we'll be able to back up data and metadata into the on-premise servers. So when I say on-premise, those two are kind of truly on-premise, not in your private cloud infrastructure. So once the backup environment is set up, that's when we actually go ahead and register. And once environments are registered, like my two, and you can go ahead and start configuring templates. And I've configured one such backup configuration here, but I'll show you how it looks like, right? Taking a backup right here of data and regular data, right? I don't want to include anything objects or knowledge article objects. If I have to, there's always, but let me go with a regular metadata. So by default, all the metadata types are selected, but I can be kind of cherry picky here. Just select a couple. And I will go to the data side of things. And again, by default, everything will be selected, but I can cherry pick again here. There we go. So every object there is displayed in here, and there's a couple of options in this view that you see right here. One is you can cherry pick specific objects, like I said earlier, yes. But what you can do is you don't necessarily always have to include the dependencies, meaning select the dependencies from this list. So let's say I want to go with the account object, right, and its records. And I want to retrieve its dependencies too. So I literally cannot go to contacts, opportunities, this, that. There's multiple account references, right, on the parent side and child side. But if I go down that list, it's probably never going to end. So what I can do is I can go ahead and say include hierarchical records, and Vault will by default include the parent-child dependencies for accounts. It will include that in every backup that it takes, starting the first one. So I'm going to do that for accounts here. And let's say hierarchical backup of accounts. I'll just call it that. And I will, by default, set the backup types to be incremental, meaning the first time that it takes a backup, it will be a full backup because it's the first backup, right? And then going forward, it will be incremental. So only the changes will be backed up from the second time. And you can schedule a backup once every 5 minutes as well. But if you think that's probably an overkill for the organization, we totally understand. You can schedule a backup once every 2 hours, 3 hours, or even every day. We suggest at least taking a backup once every day. That way, be it an organization with lots of data changes or minimal data changes, it will be useful at some point in time going forward. And this daily backup is something that is suggested for incremental backup, right? But what if you decide to take a full backup? We suggest taking a full backup probably once every week, or maybe even once every fortnight, if not a week. So I'll go with the default settings in here. So I can go ahead and save this. So once the configuration is saved, the backup here, in this case, I don't necessarily have to because I've configured this on a scheduled basis, right? Automatically run, but you to be able to show you how you would like, and along with what record. I really apologize with respect to the internet connection here. So I'll switch over to backups here. Let me go to the Salesforce environment that I'm working on, which is ARPG8. And these are some of the backups that I've taken over time. I initiated a backup once every 10 or 15 minutes, I guess. And that's why it's literally running multiple times a day. But if there's a need to manually trigger a backup at any point in time, you can do that using the option right here. So first, you can incremental backup or a full backup using these options and then initiate one. But if you've already, then no worries at all. Once the backup is completed, you can go to the summary or the report. And this is where you will be able to see how many successfully backed up metadata there is, and how many failures there are. With that, we don't have any failure count in this list. And you can go to the data side of things to see what dependencies have been retrieved as part of account object as well. So these are some of the dependencies that we have as part of accounts, contacts, leads, and opportunities that we have identified. And if there's any files and attachments that go with the records that were backed up, right, you'll be able to see a list of them in this view as well. Currently, I do not have any, but if there's anything, we will back them up as well. And when you take a backup, typically, right, let's say I take a backup once every maybe 2 days or once every 3 days. I don't do it on a daily basis, but then I realize there's some sort of data inconsistencies between the backups that I've been taking. So what I want to do is, let's say the last backup that I've taken was maybe day before yesterday on the 23rd, Friday. And I want to be able to perform a comparison of that backup snapshot versus what I have in my live environment, so that I know what these data inconsistencies will look like. And if there is any discrepancies, I will go ahead and restore the data off of my snapshot. So if that is the idea, I can leverage the compare feature within Vault to be able to do that. So compare does not just compare two different backup snapshots, but it also compares a specific snapshot with a live environment. So you don't necessarily have to always compare the latest snapshot with what was backed up probably a few days back or so. While that is still an option, what I'm going to do right here is I'll go to probably the first backup there ever was for this configuration, and I'll go ahead and compare this to the live environment. So on the metadata front, I'm looking at a custom object right here. So let's scroll down, right? So if there is any custom object level differences, I don't see anything till now. They will be displayed in here. So if you think there is a specific object, and within the object, there's specific field level settings that are different, then you can go to that particular object to be able to see line level differences, just like how we have seen for Autorabit. But in this case, since we are specifically focusing on data, right? So let's say I go to accounts here. No, if there is any modifications from the last backup snapshot, the live or configuration, I'll be able to see them here. And the difference view for the users will be a record level difference view. There we go. So this one is highlighted in red, right? So if I want to be able to see that, it says the name for this particular account record is Dickinson Place, and I can see the is deleted node is set to false as well as true. What this means is the first row where is deleted is set to false is basically saying that the this account record is currently part of the backup snapshot that you have used in this comparison. So remember, I chose the very first backup snapshot for this org. So the very first snapshot contains this account record, whereas the live environment does not have this particular account record at the moment, because it's either been soft deleted or hard deleted from the target environment. And likewise, if there's any other difference, right? For example, S4s here, you can see the same you can see similar behavior as well, meaning that the backup snapshot does not does have this record, whereas the live configuration does not. So what you can do at this point in time is this account record might or might not have any dependency with other objects, right? We never know that. But as long as we have selected the include hierarchical records option while configuring a backup, we don't really have to worry about whether they have dependencies or not. The reason I say that is when you select this one along with this record, right? There were 2 records deleted in the live org. So when I go ahead and trigger a restore, upon some runtime options, I'm going to see them both getting reflected in the target environment, because it's not what we do when it comes to restore is we take the account schema in this case into consideration. So whatever account schema was backed up, the same account schema will be reflected during restores as well. And within Vault, there's 2 different ways to initiate that sort of restore. You can initiate a record level restore using this option right here, straightforward, or select the fields as well. So let me go back here. You can select the fields and perform a field level restore. There might be a need to fetch selective fields and restore those values alone. So if there is that requirement in the organization, you can feel free to use this technique too. And in this case, I am going to probably use this one. So yeah, let me disable these rules. I was just thinking of whether I have to do that or not, but let me do that just to be sure about the restoration. And what this does is, just like any data seeding activity, right? When you restore data or seed data to the target, you want to make sure that workflows and validations do not come in the way. So we can disable that during runtime. And after a successful migration of those records to the target, we will make sure Vault or Autorabit, whatever we use for data seeding purposes, will make sure that they are re-enabled for you in the target environment. That way, there is no manual activity for the user. So I will initiate, and that should take us to feature. There we go. The restore is currently in progress. And so talked about the and about Vault in the different. How does it the eyes of a user trying to perform a restore? How does the schema look like? So let's you can for you to be able to get a full grasp of the account schema feature, and you can select the backup snapshots from which you're restoring. Right, we selected probably the one at the very first. So the first backup that we have taken, you can be selective about the restore, and when you choose specific metadata members or data records for a restore, that's when you get to see the hierarchy. So in this case, I'm not going to be selective about accounts, but I can view the schema to be able to identify what records are going to be sitting in the target at a later point in time. So this schema is literally the same as what we have seen in Autorabit just a few minutes back. And when it comes to restoring or data seeding, there is options for field mapping as well. If you don't want to restore some specific fields, do a field level restore, like I said, then mappings are important for us to select what fields values should be restored or seeded. On field mapping here, and also some restore is where you use a backup snapshot as the source, and then kind of restore a data or a metadata from where the back in the first place, right? We have replicate as an option as well. See, so like data load that we have seen, where you can take a specific source org and then migrate data and its relationships to the target. Here within Vault, you can leverage the replicate feature. So what's the difference? I mean, if you'd ask me what the difference is between Replicate versus Autorabit's Data Loader Pro, the difference is pretty straightforward in the sense that the Replicate feature uses the backup snapshots as its source to see data into lower environments, maybe from a prod to a dev one or prod to integration. It can be anything. Whereas when you talk about Data Loader Pro, it's moving data and its relationships between two Salesforce environments. How does that make a difference to me as a user? It does technically, because when you start taking, taking or rather fetching records or retrieving records from a source snapshot, it's going to consume lesser API calls compared to fetching records directly from a Salesforce environment. So that's where it makes a subtle difference when it comes to Replicate versus Data Loader. But functionality-wise, they do the same, which is a data seeding with masking capabilities. So I'll choose this as the target. This is the source. I'm going to choose a specific record, or rather snapshot here. I can choose multiple snapshots too, but I'll go with one. I can selectively replicate this. And I can select the metadata members. Let me just go ahead and select an object and select everything that's part of the data side of things, account and its dependencies. And before I replicate, I can create. So masking rule is, let's say I apply it to contacts. And there was a question from earlier whether if we select string or text, do we see all the fields in here? So we will be able to see the fields in here and select the masking styles as well. Suffix, prefix, random meaning shuffling the characters within a string, or substitution refers to kind of replacing the entire string. And multiple masking rules can be applied, one on top of the other as well. So as in when you think you're good with respect to the number of masking rules that have been applied, you can then initiate the replicate job or the data seeding job. So I'll go ahead and initiate replicate right now. Just disable these ones. This is with respect to data seeding, and also more with respect to what support for data archival as well. So if you go back to setup here, right, you might have seen, but Salesforce environment, you get to choose whether the configuration that you create is a backup an archival configuration. Earlier we clicked on this option, but you can also click on the archival configuration, select the records or the objects that you want to not objects actually, archival is just for data, right? So you select the records that you need to be archived along with automatic dependency identification with Vault. And once that archival configuration is set up, if it's automated, you don't have to worry about it. You can just let the archival automatically be initiated, and then you can monitor off of this view here. So with respect to archival, the interesting thing is it's technically like taking a backup, right? But then it's going to delete the records from Salesforce. And you might want to do that, especially if you think you're running out of space in Salesforce, which can always be, increased if it's a production environment. But if it's other environments, then you might want to delete those records, have it in place in the backup snapshots. So that's where archival comes into play. But when you initiate an archival in Vault, after taking a backup and after kind of getting ready to delete the records from Salesforce, we are going to ask you as a user who initiated the archive as to whether you're good with that deletion. So once you hit confirm, only then the records will be deleted from the target, from the source org. And likewise, we have support for GDPR as well. Kind of very different. We did hear a lot about GDPR sometime last year, or even at the end of 2019, where especially in Europe, this is right now. That is right now a continent where GDPR is strongly enforced, and it's kind of all across the place as well. So we started implementing this feature, and within GDPR, there's multiple classes, but the one that we support is the forget me clause. So if your Salesforce records are configured to have or configured to be GDPR enabled, let's say, then you can create a GDPR request within What it will go ahead and identify the records that are GDPR enabled in the org. You can upload them as record IDs in here, or just a CSV file of record IDs. That works as well. That's probably more convenient if you're including a bunch of records. And when we have that file, right, we are basically going to check whether GDPR is enabled in that particular source org. And if it's enabled, we'll go to the backup snapshot for whatever records you have uploaded in this file. For those records, we'll anonymize the data in the snapshot. That way, you can never restore off of it. And also for compliance purposes. So that's where GDPR comes from. And this is kind of a quick summary of the Vault platform, which is Autorabit's data and metadata backup and recovery solution. So as before, team, I'll just take a quick pause here to see if there's any questions. Yeah, Dhruvesh, code scan is coming up in probably another 3 or 5 minutes. So bear with me, please. Let's look at the QA. Okay, so there's a question from Praveen here. Are the backups related to the recycle bin? Has the deleted records exist in recycle bin? And can we have the backup here for more than that period of time? So typically, with respect to backup, that's a great question. You can backup soft deleted records as part of Vault as well. And when you restore off of it, if the record is soft deleted, not hard deleted, right? It's still in your recycle bin. Then you can restore off of it, and the field and the system fields would remain the same. So something like a last modified date, the created date will still remain the same. Any of the system fields. Last modified will obviously change because we are restoring it at that point in time. But yeah, if it's a hard deleted field, then restoring it means that we are kind of reinserting that with a new record ID and everything. Okay, so to be specific to answering your question here, Vault does not have any control on how long the record stays in Salesforce's recycle bin. I hope I answered the question with that point. But yeah, let me know, Praveen. And does Autorabit support serial batch processing? Yes, that is the default default approach that we take to do backups, restores, and replicates as well. So batch processing, serial batch is something that we by default perform. Okay, someone has a question about Autorabit Academy. Pesha, do you mind taking that one?
Take care of it. Thanks.
Oh, okay, cool. Nice. Thank you. Okay, I guess those are the questions with respect to Vault. But yeah, feel free to kind of shoot out more questions in case you have anything. In the meanwhile, let me start with code scan here. So I'll start my screen share again. There we go. I'll have to switch to a different organization. Okay, perfect. So code scan is, I don't want to kind of repeat that again, but it's something that we recently acquired. But before that, we've had this integration for quite a long time where you're able to use the source code in your repository or in your Salesforce environment, and then be able to validate that against best practices. So that's where CodeScan, as a static code analysis or an SAST solution, comes into play. With respect to CodeScan, there's a couple of things to remember, right? So as a tool itself, CodeScan can be deployed on the cloud, or it can be self-hosted as well. Meaning, if you have a Windows, Linux, or Mac, where you have to kind of have this running in your own servers, not necessarily on the cloud, then we do have a self-hosted version of CodeScan available as well. And as some of you might already be aware of, this solution leverages the SonarQube reporting interface to be able to populate the results from a static code analysis. So, for instance, let's get into the details in a little bit. But if I go into the Autorabit project, right, I'm looking at all these issues, vulnerabilities, code smells, so on and so forth. But this is where the reporting interface comes into play. So on top of the SonarQube reporting interface, we have CodeScan built into it. So this is where all the results are displayed for each of the projects. So again, if the team is if the folks here are interested in identifying kind of the minimal requirements when it comes to server configuration for self-hosted versus what's available on the cloud, the documentation for CodeScan has literally everything. So however, you might want to configure CodeScan in your environment at a later point in time for the organization, you can get all those information from the documentation for that. And when it comes to this particular SAST solution, it follows all the traditional security approaches, security principles rather. So you talk about open web application security policies, or CWE, or SANS guidelines, the sysadmin admin network, so on and so forth. All those security best practices or guidelines are a part of this one. Meaning, if there is any Apex class or any metadata that technically should be detected as a code smell according to one of these security principles, then CodeScan will let you identify those bugs and vulnerabilities. So let's actually get into the details of this particular GUI that we are looking at. So the first thing that we do when we log into CodeScan is analyze a project, right? So you can go ahead and analyze a new project. For example, let's say I want to bring in my source code from a Git environment. Just an example, it can be any of these environments that we support at the moment, Salesforce being one of them as well. But since Salesforce's recent integration, or recent tight integration with VS Code rather, we have seen a lot of customers of Salesforce use VS Code to be able to build on top of existing metadata. So if there's any user story to work on, developers log into VS Code, they go ahead and make some changes out of it. So that's where we kind of saw a huge increase in the way that people analyze their projects, right? Earlier, it used to be Salesforce, and then people used to use Git, Bitbucket, any of the flavors. But then since the VS Code integration, we see that a lot of customers are using Git. So let's use one of the Git flavors as well. I'm just trying to log into one of the GitLab environments and take it from there. So within the GitLab environment, I have multiple projects here, multiple repositories rather. And this tool will out to those individual repositories. And I can select from that list. So it's currently validating using OAuth connectivity. And these are the repositories that we have, right? So be it DX structured or non-DX structured, does not really matter. You can go ahead and test any of the repository right here. And the project branch, I'll just go ahead and call it master. And this is something that's by default populated. It's good that if we kind of have this as it is. And name, obviously, we need this to be a little descriptive, right? So we'll just call it a GitLab project. And I can start, I can go ahead and run the source code analysis on top of this right now. So what I'm trying to do is, CodeScan already has some pre-built rules that are existing within its rule sets. So when I say analyze this project right now, that's within the GitLab source code, CodeScan is actually preparing its default rule sets to be run against this one. Currently, it failed. The reason for that failure is if we go into the quality profiles, right? So there are some specific rules to be applied during the analysis. So if you look at the quality profile, what does that mean? It means that for each of the language there is within the Salesforce ecosystem, CodeScan has built its own rule set, and within the rule set, it has its own set of rules as well. So let's go to the most common ones. Let's go with JavaScript, right? So if you look at JavaScript, there's 3 different types of quality profiles that CodeScan has. One is the Salesforce Lightning, and the other one is SonarWay, and the other one is SonarWay Recommended. There's usually subtle differences between these two. One of these rule sets with more rules, for example, the SonarWay Recommended, right? This is actually a stricter rule set that we apply to the source code to be able to analyze it. Some of the organizations, they probably just want to validate the best practices on a very high level, not get into the stricter guidelines and so on and so forth. So for those organizations, we would recommend the SonarWay. So if we go into one of the details in here, I have in total 103 rules within this that are active right now. So these are some of the rules, right? They fall into multiple categories. If you look at it, a lot of these are bugs, a lot of these are vulnerabilities, code smells, and then something called security hotspots as well. We'll cover those issue types in a little more detail later. But these are the default rules within that quality profile. And if there is a need to create custom rules, there is always an option with it right now. We do have something called a PMD rule designer. So using a PMD rule designer, which is a desktop application, if I may, you can go ahead and start having your own custom rules and then incorporate that within Autorabit for running through static code runs as well. So let me go back to quality profiles one more time here. So let's say you want to be able to compare multiple rules. So within JavaScript, right? There's 3 different rules. I want to know what the difference between SonarWay is and SonarWay Recommended is. So I can go to this one, and then I can compare this with SonarWay. And then, hey, this CodeScan solution, what this tells me is, it tells me that there's 41 rules specifically in SonarWay Recommended, and probably there's no rules that are only in SonarWay. So meaning SonarWay Recommended is much more stricter in the sense that it has more rules by which you can probably test or validate your source code. So you can compare these rule sets within a single language and then decide what you want to use for your source code. So that's with respect to quality profile here. And also there is, you can set them as default. As you can see here, right now SonarWay is set as default in the JavaScript language. But if I want to, kind of set SonarWay Recommended as the default, I can go ahead and do that. Like I said, it just has more, stricter rule sets. And likewise, there's something called quality gates as well. So just a quick overview of what we have gone through. We have gone through how to create a new project, be it with Salesforce source code or version controls source code. And then we also saw how to quickly analyze it and then look at the results as well. We'll come back to issues and see the detailed results of that particular project as well. But after looking at how to analyze a project, we talked about quality profiles, how CodeScan has some inbuilt rule sets within which it contains rules for validating your source code. And some of these quality profiles can be used then and there, or you can extend off of it to create a new quality profile of your own choice, have some specific rules in that particular profile. And on the same front, there is something called quality gates as well. So this is where you can choose a specific metrics against which a code or a source code has to be validated against. So for example, these are some of the metrics, right? There we go. These are some examples in here. So there's already a sonar way, a quality gate that's inbuilt again. So if you don't specify anything by default with respect to a quality profile or a quality gate, CodeScan is going to assume or default it to a specific setting. And one such setting is sonar way for quality gate. And what it does is, if let's say these are the 5 metrics that we have configured, right? So when validating a source code against best practices, if the coverage on the new code is less than 80%, then this quality gate is going to mark it as unstable. And what does this mean, right? What does coverage on new code mean? So coverage on new code might actually mean the changes from the previous version. For example, let's say I have source code in my GitLab environment, right? And after the 22nd of April, I made some changes to the source code. So I can choose a specific date in here, 22nd of April. So after which, if there's any change in the source code in my GitLab repository, it's going to consider that as new code, and it's going to validate the coverage on it. So if the coverage on that new code is less than 80%, then it's going to mark the static code run as unstable, like I said earlier. And it's not just this metric that we have in here. Of course, you can create a quality gate of your own as well. So I think I already have one here. There we go. So you can add multiple conditions in here. So these are some metrics against which you can check. So you can check cyclomatic complexity, cognitive complexity, code coverage, so on and so forth. There's technical debt that can be analyzed. There's vulnerabilities that can be analyzed along with duplications as well. So this is a long list to be able to choose from. But yeah, if you think the default sonar way quality gate looks good to kind of stop your build or stop your code scan and show the results, show the negative results, if I may. If your code is not being validated properly, then you can leverage that option as well. So an interesting thing about new code is not just changes made off of a specific branch from that period of time. So I talked about how you can record April 22nd as a date, and then any changes made after April 22nd on that particular branch is considered as new code, right? Not necessarily. It can be it can be changes made to a child branch that's created off of the parent as well. So let's say I have a master branch, right? I've been validating the code, source code in my master branch to check for best practices using CodeScan. Now I spin off an integration branch from a master branch. Then I can set my new code criteria to be like this. Hey, whenever a new branch is spun off of this existing parent branch or master branch, make sure that whatever code is in there is considered as new code, and start validating the best practices against that. So there's multiple different ways to define what a new code might look like. And yeah, so that's kind of the basic settings when it comes to running a code scan. Why I call that basic is to be able to run a project against some rule sets, you need to have quality gates, because if you don't have these metrics, right, then we are probably going to mark everything as valid. So vulnerabilities will not be detected, bugs will not be detected, security hotspots will not be notified to individuals. And similarly, if you don't have quality profiles, the actual rules with which you're validating, then there's nothing to check your code components against, right? So these are kind of the basic settings when it comes to code scan. And once we have these in place, it's just about understanding the run for a specific project. So I can go to projects in here. So there's multiple options in here. So let me look at maybe the Azure repository against which I've run this project. So this is the simplest view that we would get in terms of identifying the issues rather. So from my Azure repository, there's a bunch of code and metadata components that looks like this. So these are the metadata members and code members that I've validated with the standard rule sets in CodeScan. And in an overview, in a nutshell, these are the bugs that are identified: vulnerabilities, code smells, coverage, so on and so forth. And obviously, you get the lines of code if it's code level change as well. And if there's any issues, right, I can go to the issues tab to be able to monitor this. And by default, everything is shown in here. But if I want to kind of default this to just a code smell, right, I can go ahead and identify it based on the severity. So for each of these issue type, be it a bug or a vulnerability or a code smell, you will have individual severity types. In code smell, right now, my code has been categorized as critical, major, and minor. So these are by default identified as major, minor, or critical, right? But if you want to go ahead and change the change the category for one of these issue types, you can feel free to. So for example, the results of a code scan are brought to you right here. So you have 474 code smells right here. And out of which there's 2 critical code smell that code scan themselves have identified, right? So if that's the case, and you think this is probably not not a critical code smell at all, because I'm having a cyclomatic complexity of 4, which is bad, but it's not really bad. Let's say if that's the case, right? So I can just point it to probably a major violation. So that gets saved in my quality profile and for this particular run. So if I want to kind of have this setting saved for subsequent runs as well, then I need to make that change in the quality profile within this particular code smell category. And also one other thing to identify from here is if multiple users or developers are working together to resolve a specific issue or a bug, whatever it is, right? Then if you have worked on the cyclomatic complexity issue, addressed it from a value of 4 to a value of 2, let's say, which is quite decent, right? So even though there are still 2 loops out there somewhere that's contributing to that value, but it's still much better than the current number, which is 4. So what you can do is you can go ahead and call it as resolved, as fixed, so that from the next iterations for the same code, this will not pop up again because you've already resolved it. And another interesting thing from the overview here is, let me go to this one, right? Let me go to vulnerabilities here. So it takes us into this graphical format where I'm able to see what the remediation effort is for each of the violations that I've encountered. So I'm looking at just the vulnerability portion for now. So if you look at this graph here, there is a specific class, Einstein Vision Controller class, that has 251 lines of code. And the security remediation effort for that one takes around 3.5 hours, which is quite a lot, right? And why is it so much? Like, what are some of the violations that I have as part of this one? So if I click on that Apex class, I'm able to look at lots of these violations. 1, 2, 3, 4. I can literally count, go on counting. So there's, I think, close to 7 major vulnerabilities if I look at it here. And to be able to fix this, it's going to take close to 3.5 hours is what we are saying. Again, that's the timestamp. It can take closer to that point in time, maybe 3 hours or maybe even 4 hours at some point in time. So it's always good to have that in, have that displayed to a user, right? So as a user, for example, as a code scan solution, it tells me that you have 92 violations. I get that picture, but how long does it take to resolve those 92 violations typically? And that's where CodeScan tells you that it probably would take close to 2 days to be able to identify and fix all of these errors in the source code itself. So that's kind of a quick overview of CodeScan here. Of course, there's a lot to it with respect to how we can delegate permissions for multiple users in the organization. Let's say if some of the users should not have access to your project's source code or your project's analysis, you can cut down on those access settings just like you do. You work with Salesforce profiles and permission sets, and also, more importantly, this particular solution has integrations with multiple tools. So you talk about Jenkins, multiple Git flavors, as we have seen in here, and some of the common IDEs that you might use: VS Code, Welkin Suite, IntelliJ. CodeScan can work with all of these integrations, and everything is available for you in the documentation as well. So if you want to be able to leverage this tool for your organization, we will be more than happy to help as well. And one final thing that I do want to point out is, while the results are visible here, let's say you want to export that in a CSV file, then you can do that. You will be able to download it to your local system and kind of have an own copy of it all by yourself. So, but the only problem to that I see is when you have a specific issue fixed, if you go ahead and update it in a CSV file, it won't be visible to the other users who have access to this project. So if you go ahead and fix an issue, right, you can go ahead and mark it as resolved, as fixed within the UI, so that others can kind of identify what are the fixed issues versus what's not yet fixed. Right, so I will take a pause right here, and happy to take any questions at this point in time. Cool. I don't think I see any questions. Great. But yeah, as Prisha mentioned earlier, if the team does have any queries, needs more information on the Autorabit suite, which might include any of these products, ARM or Vault or CodeScan, feel free to reach us at info@autorabit.com, and we'd be more than happy to help.
Thanks a lot, Vignesh. Thanks, Pratyusha, for your time. Over to you, Manasvi. We'll just start with the quiz session, and then accordingly we'll proceed further.
Yes, sure. So thank you, Piyusha and Vignesh, for such an insightful session. The sessions were full of learnings and knowledge, which will definitely help all. We are grateful and thank you once again. And now, as it is quiz time, so let's get ready for the quiz. So there are some guidelines for the quiz, and I'll be taking you through those guidelines. All the attendees need to enter the link www.kahoot.it on your browser. You can also use your mobiles or laptop, whichever convenient. The link is also being provided in the chat box. After you enter the link in your browsers, please enter the PIN displayed on the screen. The PIN is 2397010. If you're facing any issues, please put up in chat box. After that, after entering the PIN in team name, please enter only your name and then proceed by entering your name once again. So you have to just follow 3 simple steps. Put the link in your browsers, www.kahoot.it. Then enter the PIN 2397010. Then in the team name, please enter only your name and then proceed by entering your name once again. After you follow these 3 steps, you will see on the screen your names will be displayed after the successful registration. I'm waiting for all the attendees to join. Yes, I can see 12 of the attendees have joined. Waiting for more of them to join. If you face any issues, please put up in chat box. And you can see your names being displayed on the screen after successful registration. I'll wait for 2 more minutes for more attendees to join. Meanwhile, I'll tell you about the quiz. The questions of the quiz will be displayed on the screen with their respective options. Whichever you think is the right answer for the question, kindly match the color code of the options and select the correct answer on your respective browsers. And do remember, this is the fastest finger quiz, so the attendees need to select the correct answer in the fastest time. And then accordingly, the winners will be announced on the screen by the Kahoot application, and they will be receiving certification voucher on their email IDs. So I hope everyone is clear with the quiz instruction. I can see 19 of them have joined. Yes, if it's asking for team name, you enter your name only and then again proceed by entering your name once again. Just you need to enter your name once. Okay, so I can see 24 of them have joined and it's a good time to start with the quiz session. So let's begin with the quiz. The first question on the screen: can technical debts be corrected using Autorabit's integration with code scan? True or false? Come on, everyone, please answer the question. For true, it's blue color and it's red. Match the color code and answer it. Okay, that's great. So all the 24 of them have answered correctly. It's true. The correct answer is true. Let's see the scoreboard.
So I guess there is some network issue. Renuka is on the top. Rahul is on the second with 966. Piali is on 961. Pravati is on 961. Drivesh is like on fifth position. That is 960.
Sorry for the inconvenience due to network connectivity. So as we can see on the scoreboard, let's proceed with the next question. So you can see 15 of them have answered correctly. And the scoreboard is showing that Piali has topped the list, following up with Shinu, Sai, Marshall, and Namisha. Let's proceed on to the next question.
So I can see four of them have correct answers. And the scoreboard is accordingly like Abhishek is on the top, Swapnil is on the second, Piali is on the third, Shinu is on the fourth, and Sai is on the fifth. Coming to the next question. Does Autorabit integrate with Jenkins? Oh, great. So 20 people have correctly answered this. Score is like still Abhishek is on the top, Swapnil is on the second, Shrinu is on the third, Piali is on the fourth, Sai is on fifth. Coming to the next question. When was Autorabit founded? So 12 of them have correct answers. Coming to the scoreboard, Abhishek is on the top, Swapnil is on the second, Piali is on the third, Sai is on fourth, Marshall is on 5th. Now the last and the 6th question is, rule set in code scan can be tweaked based on the organization standard. "21 have correct the answers, and the scoreboard for the first, second, and third would be Sai is on the third, Swapnil is on the second, and Abhishek is on the first. Congratulations to all the winners. And fourth position is Piali, and fifth is Swapnil. Congratulations, everyone. So can you just please all of you mention your email ID on the chat so that accordingly we'll take it ahead.
Yes, we would like to get the email IDs and names of
Yes.
5 winners. Yeah.
Yes.
Congrats to them. Yeah. Thanks everyone for engaging in this session and the first session. Yeah. I guess there is one more email ID and name missing. There are only 4 now on the chat. Sagar, can you confirm these are the 5 people?
Yes, I'm just noting down all the email IDs. Yes, I noted down all the email IDs, and you will just get the certification voucher on your email ID.
Yeah, congrats team again. Look forward to more learning sessions from you guys.
Thanks a lot for your time, Piyusha and Vignesh.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks a lot, team, for joining the call. Bye-bye.
Congratulations, winners. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.